Hey everyone, I'm Christine Gritmon here with Social. I do this show every week where I talk to smart people about different topics relating to social media, small business, all that jazz. And this has been Mental Health Month. May is actually real life mental health month, not just on social. And so I'm finalizing that with someone who I've followed for a while, having nothing to do with her actual job. Amber Naslund. Hey.
Hi, how are you?
Great. I was just saying to Amber that we've talked a lot online, but this is the first time we've really actually talked directly, which is kind of funny.
And which is crazy to me after all these years. I feel like the internet makes the world feel really small. So the fact that we're actually here doing this after all these years is crazy.
And thank you so much. Now, I've actually asked you on before to talk about LinkedIn because you work for LinkedIn. So I think it's funny that the time that we finally got this together is actually the way that I started following you to begin with, which had nothing to do with LinkedIn, except that it was probably originally on LinkedIn technically, which is that your personal area, one of your personal areas of interest, is imposter syndrome.
That's right. Yeah, it's sort of I fell into it accidentally, most because I'm a victim of it myself. And
well, you fell into it accidentally because you're an imposter, so clearly you couldn't have done it deliberately.
Yeah, great. It's funny how being the type A personality that I am, when something happens to me, and I started talking to my therapist about this, and then I needed to know more. So the more that I learned and the more I researched, the more I realized how truly universal and ubiquitous this is, and how the collision with my digital life, the world that I spend on social and digital media so often, the overlap between those things is pretty strong too. And so I got a little fascinated by how social and digital media impact those feelings too. So it's been a bit of a rabbit hole, but yeah, here I am now.
Absolutely. Well, that makes perfect sense to me. So, first, for those who may not be aware, let's talk about what imposter syndrome is.
Yeah. So, imposter syndrome it's not a clinical diagnosis. It's more its official original name back in 1978 when it was documented was called the imposter phenomenon. So, it's really more about a set of feelings and kind of the way that we process information. And it was researched by a couple of researchers, both female, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. And they did a study of about 150 or so very high achieving women, because their hypothesis at the time, this is in 1978, was that women specifically encountered these feelings. And the feeling set is feeling like no matter how much evidence you have to the contrary, which is an important point here, you have plenty of evidence, but you still feel like your achievements are due to luck rather than skill or talent, that whatever achievements or success that you've enjoyed is a fluke, or is something that at any minute the rug is going to get pulled out from underneath you and the house of cards is going to come falling down. And that people are going to realize that you've been faking it this whole time, and that really and truly you're a fraud with a facade, but that you don't really have the capabilities that you do. And
I like what you mentioned about the importance of evidence, because I mean, some people really are losers.
Yeah. Well, we could probably have a whole conversation about the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is the opposite of this in some ways. But we all have things. We can't be great at everything, right? So there are definitely areas in my life, like if I went and pretended to be a card-carrying, bar-passed lawyer, that would for sure be fraudulent. That's not in my skill set. But it's more about things that I can actually point to, proof and evidence that I have accomplished certain things or that I'm capable of doing certain things. And yet the persistent feeling sticks around that next time I won't be able to do it, or that tomorrow all that's going to go away all of a sudden because somebody's going to find out that I've been faking it. Mm-hmm. And it was something that really was put into sharp relief for me when my business fell apart that I had started. And in the aftermath of putting my financial and professional life back together, I was feeling an awful lot like my best years were behind me, that all of the things I'd done, like publishing the book or doing the the successful keynote speeches, all that stuff to me felt like a distant memory. And I was pretty convinced I couldn't do it again. Mm-hmm. So it was like, oh man, that all must have been just a total fluke. I was lucky. And I actually had a lot of people in my critic corner who, but everybody has those. Yeah. You spend enough time online, you collect
haters gonna hate.
Yeah, haters gonna hate. But I had a few people along the way tell me that I was just in the right place at the right time. That I got lucky that I was successful at any stretch. And it's easy to start to internalize that stuff and believe it. So I spent a fair few years kind of stuck in that trench. And the more I realized, one of the ways that I cope with stuff like this is that to understand it better helps me through it. So that's why I started doing a lot of studying around this kind of process and phenomenon.
How long have you been studying it?
I'd say probably it's been about 3 years now in depth. I mean, I think I've always had I minored in psychology in school. So I've always had sort of a bent toward how our brain works and what makes it tick.
And you're in marketing, so there you go.
I know. And it's weird how these paths collide. Like I was a music major and that fits in somewhere. And anyway, so, but I've always had an interest in psychology, but I think I've spent the better part of a few years, like really in depth reading the studies around this and doing some of my own research and combining that with some of my understanding about the sociology and culture around digital and social media. So I'm working on, I'm writing about it. I'm working on a book. It's a really long, slow process. And there's imposter syndrome about talking about imposter syndrome.
Oh, of course there is. Who am I to talk about it? I'm not a PhD,
That's exactly it. It's just like, and there are surely smarter people than me, right, who should be writing about this, who are, to your point, PhDs or something. So why me? But I'm going to do it anyway, because why not? Yeah.
Why you is because you can. Now I'm very interested by a couple points that you mentioned. One of them is it's very fascinating to me that this originally was considered a women's issue, especially in the 70s. So I don't know. I'd love to dig into that. I certainly know men who suffer from imposter syndrome as well, but I would imagine that it's a little different for women in our society.
Well, I think that it is an amplifier. So many of the things that we deal with as women and the narratives that we hear as women reinforce some of those feelings in ways that I think it's since been shown that it's pretty democratic in the way that it sits with both men and women. So it's definitely not an exclusively women thing, nor is it exclusively an adult professional thing. Like people feel this, kids experience it, college students experience it. But I think it started that way because Doctors Clance and Imes, who started the research, were noticing that they themselves in their studies in pursuing their academic careers were noticing that their peers, a lot of whom happened to be women, were constantly being like, I don't belong here. How did I get here? This is crazy, and doubting themselves constantly. So I think it was a natural fit for their original slate of research. But there's been a ton of follow-up studies done in the ensuing years and even presently that have studied everything from academics to medical professionals to lawyers and doctors and nurses and business professionals and CEOs, and it doesn't really discriminate. There's a lot of it in pockets. But I think what's unique about the women angle is that sexism. I mean, hey, it's a thing that we've had to deal with for a really long time. And so we already have some built-in narratives that we're inferior or should feel inferior, or that we're not. We have to work twice as hard to get to the same levels of achievement. That
women can't do that job. That's not for women. Yeah. And you have to be twice as good to get half as much credit. All of that. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think all of that is just that background undertone to all of it that makes it so easy to believe. And if you're already prone to self-doubt for any reason, as a woman, I think it's really easy to get in that mental trap of listening to the outside reinforcement and listening to your own, those tapes that ruminate in your head, I don't know if anybody relates to that analogy, but mine go crazy sometimes. So sitting there and just listening to that stuff constantly, you start to internalize what you hear. And it's a lot of work to break those cycles and to replace those narratives with different things. So it's not as easy as just like reading a self-help book. I mean, I've actually done quite a bit of, in my own world, of cognitive behavioral therapy through that.
That's important because it teaches you how to change the script.
Exactly. And my scripts are very strong, and that there's actual physical evidence that these thought patterns like groove trenches in our neural pathways. So it becomes easier for our brains to believe the patterns we've come to know, whether or not they're true. So
I have heard that about negative thoughts and about positive thoughts and how they affect the neural pathways. That's very interesting that there's physical evidence.
Mm-hmm. And you can feel it when you do the work around this, how easy it is. It's like muscle memory of anything else. You know, you can feel your brain slipping into old patterns. So I liken it to like when you learn to work through some of these things, it's very much like trying on somebody else's clothes for a while. Like you feel like you're playing dress up because you're like, this is not my thought pattern. This is not how I operate. But you do have to sort of fake it till you make it a little bit and keep doing that so that you build the neural pathways to replace the old ones. I mean, it sounds really scientific-y, but it really is. It's work.
Given what you said about societal messaging, we don't have to go down this whole rabbit hole, but it begs the question about the racial and socioeconomic impacts of this stuff as well. Because when I think imposter syndrome, I will be fully honest, I think of highly educated, high-performing, often white women, because we're the ones talking about it. Yeah. But I'm sure that it's all the more prevalent in maintaining cycles in other areas.
Oh, I mean, especially right now, we can have a really charged, I'm sure, conversation about the inequality dynamics. But I think the inequality perpetuates itself.
Yes.
Because anybody who believes that there is truly such a thing as an even playing field is kidding themselves. That's not how our society is built, or how any society is built. So denying the impact of the poverty trap, the inequality and racial injustice trap, like those cycles we feed them.
Yeah.
Whether we do it deliberately or inadvertently, those cycles are part of the fabric of the society we've built, especially here in the United States. And
this is all you are, and this is all you'll ever be.
Exactly. And that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, think about like graduation rates for kids, or, my sister's a high school teacher, and we live in what I would consider a relatively affluent area. And yet there are still issues with literacy and kids being able to afford something to eat. You know, one of her biggest concerns when the pandemic hit was like, there are kids that come to her classroom for breakfast in the mornings, so she can help them get something in their tummy. And it's like, what are they doing right now?
Yeah.
And in my zip code, that seems absolutely unimaginable. And yet it's right under our noses. So you can imagine the narratives that these kids get, thinking that they're not going to amount to anything, or that they can't have the same things as other people. And the system is designed so that they actually can't.
Yeah.
So the combination of those things is it's devastating to me. And it makes me feel pretty helpless sometimes, I confess.
Well, you know what you can do? You can write a book about it. You can start discussions on it. You can spread the word and let people know that they don't have to listen to that. As Andy is saying here in the comments, why not you? Like, why not you? Someone has to succeed. Why not you?
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. And I try to tell myself that a lot. And I rely on what I call my committee of champions to keep that going for me, because I can't always be my own sole cheerleader. I struggle sometimes with feeling like, I get stuck in the same self-doubt trap that we all do, I think. So for me, I rely on some very close people in my inner circle to be the ones to encourage me, to push me, to give me the sort of strength and guidance and prop me up when I'm not feeling so great, and to remind me that why not me? That helps a ton when I can't do it on my own.
Absolutely. But here's, of course, as an experienced sufferer of this, or as an experienced experiencer, how do you not go, yeah, but they love me, they're my yes men or women?
Because they're not. I think that's part of it. Like, I'm selective about those people.
Smart. People who would give it to you straight.
Yeah, and straight with compassion. I'm a sensitive soul, and I'm able to take feedback, but it has to be delivered with a soft hand.
Yeah.
So I have to have some people around me who know that balance of gentle but firm, who have like a touch in the way that they say, now, Amber, come on now. And they can be firm, but they can still do it with love and with compassion. And I'm lucky to have a few of those people in my life, so that I know that if I'm really going down the wrong path, they will set me straight, but they will do it with a hug, and they'll do it with kindness, and they'll do it in a way that I'm able to receive it, which is really important. So they're not yes men. They are, I don't know, what's the right word for that? They're
positive realists.
Yeah, I guess that's a good one. I like positive realists. But listen, like, I have enough critics around me. There's no chance whatsoever that I'm going to over-index on people like making me feel like my head to get too big.
Yeah.
I have a problem. So I don't think there's any risk of me having too many people saying, like, cheering me on, because I am my own worst critic. I do that for at least 10 people. So it's probably fine.
Let's talk about the haters. Let's dig into the social media and the digital presence aspect of this, because we were talking about before, if you're visible enough, you're going to get those, haters. Social media has, of course, amplified this in many ways. They've also amplified support networks, but people feel very brave behind a screen. So let's talk about that and your experience with it.
Oh boy. I think I'm pretty lucky in the sense that I have not had what I would call outright abuse. I have seen some really ugly things on social media platforms. So I would say I've had a light taste of some of that.
You don't have trolls doxing you and sharing your address or anything like that. You just have people saying mean things, but mean things are still a thing. Right.
Yeah. And I've had plenty of people. I had one very infamous troll in sort of the early days of Twitter who, targeted me and several other people for lots of reasons. And just anywhere I went, followed me around to pick on my weight, my appearance, my intelligence, my whatever. Even just a couple of years ago, as I was looking for I was in between jobs. I'd been laid off from my role at Hootsuite, and I was, this was prior to my role at LinkedIn, and I was on the job market, and he wrote a post on LinkedIn, of all places, not just targeting me, but a couple of people, and talking about how we were these overrated, didn't understand why we'd had any sort of success whatsoever, and that people really needed to see that we were mediocre professionals leading mediocre lives. And it was just, and made sure, of course, to tag me in the post. So
oh my God. Are you sure your inner critic didn't get empowered by some sleeping pills and start a new account?
Seriously.
Did you look at the IP address behind this? Was it coming from inside the house?
The sad thing is, this is a person that I worked with in formal roles, not as a colleague, but as a client, sort of. And I met him in person several times. And the funny thing is, the jarring thing was, I didn't know he thought this about me. All these years, we'd had this very cordial relationship, and all of a sudden, I'm like, wow, he thinks I'm a pile of garbage.
Yeah.
So, I think I've had a lot of that kind of thing. And I'm also pretty liberal with the block and unfollow buttons. Like, I'm a big believer in curating your online experience, not to insulate yourself, but to protect yourself. Mm-hmm. And those are two different things.
Yeah.
But for my own mental health purposes, like making sure that I close doors, like I can handle intelligent discourse and disagreement. I cannot handle rudeness, cruelty. Any of those things are out of line for me, and they're just not necessary. They're not necessary.
Yeah.
So I remove those things from my circle pretty unapologetically, and I don't look back.
Amen.
Yeah. Ain't nobody got time for that stuff anymore.
No. Oh my goodness.
About that as the years have gone on. I think like in the early days of doing the social media thing, I wanted everybody to like me. And now I want the right people to like me.
I like that. That's a really good point.
Now, well, you don't have to be for everybody, I don't think. The popularity contest that is the internet sometimes can make you feel like if you don't have a bazillion followers and if you're not pleasing everybody, that you're doing it wrong. And that's marketing 101, man. Mm-hmm. I mean, you and I have been doing this a while. You don't have to be for everyone, and you can't be for everyone. And if you're doing it right, you shouldn't be.
Yeah, if you're for everybody, you're for nobody. And also, whose respect do you care about? That's really key. So we all are familiar with that record that plays over and over in our heads about, being a lucky fraud and all of that. What are some of the things that you found that are helpful rescripts?
That's a good question. I have to think about this for a second. One of the tools that I have found to be really useful, it's not so much a rescript, but it's a practice. And I'm an avid journaler. That's how I get out thoughts and like process information. But even if you're not a journaler, I think you can do this. I call it my inventory of truths. And it's literally a fact-finding mission where I sit down and without judgmental qualifiers, good or bad, I sit down and write down the things that I know I have actually done and accomplished. Everything from, buying my house on my own without help to like birthing a kid to writing a book to recovering from a business collapse and financial disaster. So I write those things down literally on a piece of paper. And I actually think that part is important. To me, the ritual of writing that out is really, the physical ritual is important. So I write those things down. I read them. And this sounds really dorky, but I take them with me. Like, they go with me in my work bag because I travel a lot for work. So when I'm feeling really out of touch or feeling very much like I'm sitting with that self-doubt and ruminating and self-pitying and all that stuff, I can pull out that list and it's like evidence. It's partly how my brain works, but it's like the evidence of looking at those things on paper in a very black and white way really helps reset my switches, because it's like, okay, I did do that. And again, it's not about like, I'm amazing. It's just like, dude, facts. These are facts. Let's take all of the drama and emotion out of it for a second, Amber. Like, these are facts that you can point to. And it's a devastatingly simple tool, but I found it to be incredibly helpful. And eventually that piece of paper gets really worn and crumbly, and then I have to rewrite it and replace it.
Well, you're also accomplishing new things, so it needs a refresh anyway.
Exactly. And I've shared this tool with a few people, and they found it really helpful too. So I think there's something to it, but that little ritual really helps me a lot.
I love that. Now let's talk about your Fraud Squad sort of project. I know that there's a study, you're compiling people's experiences. I know that you're working on a book. There's a newsletter to some degree that's sort of, on LinkedIn articles. Let's hear about that and how people can get in touch with that and what it entails.
Okay, well, there's a few things going on. This is my don't get your expectations up too high here, because some people have these like really big fancy projects. This is just my way of like organizing my thoughts around this endeavor. So yes, I have kind of a survey going on, and I would love it if you guys are watching and haven't taken it. If you go to my site, it's brasstackthinking.com/fraud squad. If you go there, there's like a 5-minute survey, and it's based on, I actually got Dr. Clance's permission to use her original rubric for identifying the imposter phenomenon.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was, we had a really cool email exchange about this project. And, but anyway, so I wanted to incorporate those questions, but I also worked with a researcher to design another layer of questions that are about social media use and how those feelings and experiences intersect. And I'm not purporting to be like an academic researcher by any stretch, but I'm trying to get some meaningful information that's somewhat statistically rigorous around people who use social media and the internet and people who feel these things and how those worlds collide. Mm-hmm. So I'm finding some really fascinating things. I'm trying not to spoil myself too much, and I'm letting that marinate until I can look at the data in aggregate and get some understandings of the patterns. But I am seeing a pretty strong correlation between people who are avid and active social media users and people who index really high on the scale for experiencing imposter syndrome. And I think it is that nature, like we talked about, and I'll get back to the other fraud squad things in a second, but I think it is that nature of the anonymity, of the internet and how easy it is to just like listen to all this stuff and see everybody's pretty curated Instagram feeds and think to yourself, how can I possibly measure up to that? Anyway, so there's that. And then I have an email list that I'm building just for people who want information about the book when I get closer to that situation. I'm in the process of writing the book proposal right now. And I can tell you that when Jay and I wrote The Now Revolution back in, 2011, I think that was now, that proposal was the easiest thing I've ever written. And this is by far the hardest. Mm-hmm. Like I have scrapped and rewritten this book proposal at least 5 or 6 times. It's brutal. I can't.
You want it to be right.
Yes, I do. And my agent has been very patient in waiting for it to be right for me. So anyway, I'm working on that. And then, but if you want to see my like ramblings and musings on this topic as they come out, you can either go to the Brass Tack Thinking blog, and I'm publishing there, or if you're a LinkedIn person, you can go and I have if you click on, it's a little weird. You got to go to my profile and look at the articles I've written, and then you'll have an option to subscribe to the Fraud Squad newsletter. And it's just kind of a regular publishing of some articles on this topic. So I wish I could say that I do it weekly, like a good girl should, but I don't.
You got stuff going on.
Yeah, this is not my day job, so I do it when I have bandwidth to do it. Anyway, so all those things are happening. I also have a group on Facebook here that it's private, but only because people are talking about some pretty sensitive stuff. So if you look up the Fraud Squad, there's a group, and if you're interested in joining, we'd be happy to have you, because it's not super active at the moment, but I'm hoping to change that in the next couple of months. I've got plans to make it more so.
I love that. I love that so much. I'm interested to see what your findings wind up being about the social media thing, because I know that I'm almost wondering if which is the chicken, which is the egg, because it's entirely possible that people with a tendency towards imposter syndrome, are more inclined towards social media for some masochistic reason.
Yeah. I don't that's an interesting hypothesis. I don't know that my data is going to
may not bear that out.
Causality or anything, but I think you're onto something in the sense that social feeds a need that we all have for community and for validation and to be seen and to be heard. And those aren't, despite the way that people talk about those things somewhat pejoratively, needing validation is a very basic human need. It's sort of something that's unique to our cognitive level, and we need reinforcement from the outside world that the things that we're thinking and doing and feeling are shared by other people, or at least understood. So I think I'm hoping that part of the outcome of some of this is letting people feel a little less bad about needing that validation, but looking for it in healthy ways. Because social media can also be the opposite, right? Where you're just trying to collect likes or clicks or follows or something, and like looking at your follower count as some proxy for like what kind of a good human you are. And that's not right either. So, I'm hoping to reframe that conversation a little bit. Stay tuned for how successful I am in that endeavor.
I'm looking forward to the whole thing. I'm staying tuned for all of it, the book, all of that. I think that your study was actually how I found you. I think that survey.
Oh, really?
So we will definitely put the link to that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Amber, for coming on and talking about this, and for talking about this in general on the internet all the time, because talking about it is how we acknowledge it and how we help each other through it and realize it's not just us.
I'm a big believer in that. I feel like if I have any purpose on the planet, it's to make people feel a little bit less alone in being a little messy and imperfect. So if I can do that at the end of the day, I'll call that a win.
Love that. Thank you so much, Amber. Again, I'm Christine Gritmon. I do this every single week. Next week is a new month. It is June, and June is going to be Twitter month. And I'm kicking it off with tweeting goddess Samantha Kelly joining us from Ireland. So definitely join us for that. And thanks. Bye.
Bye.